Hello everyone, this is Mini Ninjas, and this particular video has been long overdue for a while now, if I must admit, so we're going to hop into it pretty quickly. Namely, you can kind of guess from the boxes here, we're going to be doing a general recap of the first 4 figures of the 2021 event-exclusive figures meant for this particular convention season. Only most of this stuff has been released by P Bandai in this case, because convention season never really picked up until maybe the last month. So, starting with the Super Saiyan Son Goku figure here, to give you an idea of the format, we're going to be taking a quick look at the packaging, a quick look at the articulation, just a general quality check of the figure, and I'll also be discussing along the way how these varied from the original releases. Speaking of which, the original release for this particular figure would have been all the way back over by the Battle of Gods movie setup here, and likewise, this figure has most of the same accessories, and I actually think the exact same accessories as that original release. And for the most part, the big difference between this and the previous figure is actually quite substantial, and that's being the color change there. Namely, for the original figure, the color of the gi was a much lighter color, kind of reminiscent of what they used in the movie when he was powered up, and the hair was a little more of a pearlescent finish when it was a solid color. Whereas here, the color of the gi is a more standard orange color, fitting in with the rest of the toy line, because the other one really stood out there, and as you can see from just the way light kind of goes through and reflects around it, the hair is translucent in this case. Another big change, they fixed the the butterfly joint, which was originally a skin color on the old figure, I believe, and it now matches up, which is something they honestly need to do with more Goku figures as a whole, even the regular parts of the line. Quality-wise, I'm not gonna lie, this one was a little haphazard. As you can see, the leg kind of came off there. Thankfully, it does pop on back well enough, but there were a bit of quality issues I was having with this figure, kind of toying around and then getting it loosened up. Now we have the leg back in there. Everything does move, but it's actually quite a stiff figure, I found. Mind you, when you play around with it, it will loosen up over time, but it is something to kind of watch out for. In terms of the ankle joints, everything works fine. All the arm and upper body joints and rotational joints, which is fine. It's worth noting, though, that at least on mine, quality control on one of the boots, how they got angled, is a bit off to say the least. It is off-center, which is something that slightly annoys me now that I had a better look at that. But I just kind of turned it the other way so I don't see it as much. Elbow joints are working fine, shoulder joints are working fine, knees, a little stiff, but they work. Neck movement was a little more limited than what I was expecting, but it seems to be still at least reasonable standard fare. All in all, once you kit everything back together and play with it a bit, it moves pretty decently enough. As we take a look at the faces next, it is worth noting that I did come across another little odd QA snag in this instance when looking at the neck peg on here, which we're going to be seeing on camera in a second. And that's, despite this being a brand new figure, fresh from the factory of course, that neck peg is looking a little worn. Little odd markings and stuff that were actually on the peg itself when I checked off camera and not on the hair, and it is a bit weird. Doesn't seem to affect the performance of the part itself on there. Still works fairly fine on holding everything in place, but definitely that is looking to be a little more wear and tear that should be appropriate than something that's just fresh off the line, so to speak. So it is worth noting that it was there. Seems to be something similar to what we had with the knee just a moment ago. It's definitely a defect, but it's nothing that breaks the figure, so to speak, as we take a look at Goku's smiling face. It's worth noting as we kind of go through the next ones fairly quickly as well. The actual decals on the face do match up pretty nicely. The nice choice of the red color matches up with the hair really well in here, and everything is nice, sharp, and crisp on there, which is something I couldn't say for the bootleg that I reviewed back in the day when we looked at that. All in all, pretty much very well pleased with how that looks. And speaking of the bootleg, actually, let's get that on camera too. Once again, the one that is on the left is the current event exclusive figure, while the one on the right is the obvious bootleg. As if you couldn't tell from the shape of the joints on that one. Wow, I forgot how rough that thing was looking. Looking at the figure's hands themselves, I'm going to admit they're pretty standard fare for Goku. Nothing too surprising here. You got your open palm, you got your martial arts hand, your open, your spread fingers there for kind of ki blasts, which you can see are nicely detailed and everything. Everything on there. And kind of your grabbing hands, which are the ones I'm showcasing right now. And of course the fists that Goku have on them. As you can see, detail-wise, everything's nice, sharp, and crisp. And in terms of how the hands end up changing, it takes a little effort to pull them off. Once again, the figure is brand new and a little stiff, but all in all, it's not too much trouble. Everything comes off with a little bit of force, but goes on pretty smoothly. And I was able to interchange them quite a few times on and off camera without too much hassle. So at least that part, No issues with the wrist joints, at least on my particular figure. Good to know. On my general thoughts of whether this is worth my purchase or not, I'm going to lean towards a yes in this case. I mean, on one hand, it is another Goku figure, and we have no shortage of Goku figures, but in terms of how this is an improvement over the original, especially with the color scheme, it makes it stand a lot more in line with the rest of the mainline toys, not counting the hair, of course, which is translucent as opposed to solid, but it still fits in a lot better at a lot cheaper than the gray market for the old figure. So yes, goodbye. Moving on to the next toy of the line, of course, would be the other Battle of Gods figure that was around the same time as Goku there, Beerus himself. In terms of how this particular one differs from the original figure, it's nothing nearly as drastic. It's more just some difference in terms of the clothing lines in this case, as well as the, I'm going to say it's a collar being a lot more shiny than what I think the original figure had there. And some minor changes on the facial decals too, but all in all, this is just a more kind of a vibrant paint job than what the original figure had in bits and pieces here. But enough about that, let's take a look what the figure offers. In terms of accessories and heads, it's pretty minimalistic, but so was the original figure, so that's not exactly a huge surprise by any means. But what's here, at least, is fairly well rendered in this case. Once again, it's a fairly solid sculpt, standing at about, if you go by the top of the ears, a little over 6.5 inches, which was the same height of the Goku, as we go by the tip of his hair. I might have forgot to mention that earlier, by the way. But all in all, in terms of the general body sculpt in this case, we are looking at something that's kind of a weird hybrid between an original 1.0 figure and a 2.0 figure, depending on how you're looking at it. But honestly, it's more of a 1.0 figure than anything else. I will make a note that in terms of the sculpt at the back of the legs there, and even the legs as a whole, it's a bit weird and lanky. It's slightly separated from the body, from the way the pants have been set up there. So, not exactly my favorite thing on there. And in terms of QA, I'm going to be honest, there is definitely some issues on my figure there, at least in terms of the finish. As you can kind of see there, there are kind of much mold lines entirely throughout the figure, although on the lines it's that much more obvious. In terms of the actual joint movement, however, everything is fully functional there. A bit stiff from getting it right out of the factory for most of the parts, but all in all, everything does move fairly smoothly still. And when you play around it more, it gets a little more fluid. In terms of legs, the hips especially, those are 1.0 hips. There's not much you can do about there. It's kind of where if you want the extra motion, you just drop it down as per norm, and you can force it right back up there. The knees, I'm not so happy with the knees, as I was kind of getting at earlier. Ankles, perfectly fine. Ankle joints and toe joints, fully functional, no real big issue. And even after you add the tail in there, thankfully, unlike a lot of Frieza figures, the balancing is no real issue. It's thankfully centered enough so that the weight tends to hold up pretty well, at least in most poses. I wouldn't be able to do this with a regular Frieza figure, for instance. Tilt ahead of it there. In terms of accessories, Beerus really was as bare bones as his original release, I'm afraid. Namely, you got those 3 overall heads with a few different expressions, a yawning, an angry one, and the neutral one. You have 2 sets of hands which are clearly meant to be grabbing an object that Beerus himself doesn't come with. These open palm blasts, which would be nice to have an accessory, and this pointing one, which also feels like it should have an accessory of its own, like a destruction ball or something like that with him, but that isn't included, unfortunately. In terms of how all these pop on and off the figure, the various joints, I'm going to be honest, they actually come off really easily. Actually easier than the Goku by far on this one. Says I didn't really have any real effort taking off the hand bits, or the hand components by any means, and the head one, well, it did take a little jiggling to get it on there, still comes on with relatively little effort. So overall, build-wise, decent enough figure on there, although I would have stand to enjoy if they updated its joint system, but I guess that's not the point of this particular release. Overall, decent purchase if you didn't get the original one on there. Color-wise, I don't see a drastic difference between this and the original, except for maybe some nicer kind of gradient shading on the pants, if I must be honest. Going to the third one on this particular event-exclusive tour, we have Whis, the attendant of Beerus. All in all, in terms of his general appearance, if we look at the packaging on here, I feel that, at least based on what I've seen in the original one, unfortunately I don't have the original to compare with, the choice of purple and everything seems a little more vibrant, if anything, on this one. I guess the kind of color changes that they didn't really use on Beerus and gradients and such kind of went more to Whis on this one. That being said, much like Beerus, Whis doesn't come with much. Got his staff, of course, a few different facial expressions, 3 overall, and other than the 2 fists on his hand, he has 5 different hands, including one with a spoon. Now, in this case, this would be the tallest one of the releases in this case, going to, I'm going to say, from the top of the hair, nearly 7.5, just short of 7.5 inches overall. Presentation-wise, very clean. I really like the slight little kind of a golden accent that they include on this figure. Maybe because it's a little more subdued than what they did with Beerus on that one. And also the silver accents on the, I think, either. The one thing I will have to note, though, as we're looking at the articulation test, once again, this is a kind of a 1.0 style figure, so it's limited in movement, but actually more limited than that even. It seems that the reason they got away with such nice gradients on the skirt is because it has no movement whatsoever. It's all hard plastic. I didn't know about that, about the original release here. So if you're expecting any kind of high kicks or anything, not that Beast is really known for that sort of thing, you're not going to get it. And in fact, the elbows are kind of a one-jointed elbow. Your ankle movements are non-existent. And in terms of the knee movements, it might be really hard to tell on camera there. They actually remind me a little more of Figma figures as a whole, but because of the skirt, with much less movement. Beerus is a non-figure. I'm actually quite disappointed by that, even though I know he didn't do much in the series. In terms of the actual detail of the various accessories such as the head, all the facial details are just really nice and crisp. Everything is nice and sharp on there, can't complain too much. And the same thing with the staff, which, well, I only noticed it was kind of held in with some translucent plastic or resin, which actually was a nice touch on there. But in terms of the accessories, they're kind of your standard fare in terms of general quality. And well, here's what those open hands are meant for. I imagine this is what Beerus was meant for, so realistically, if you're getting a Whis, you better have a Beerus with him, otherwise it kind of makes that a bit silly, and I guess vice versa. They're part of the same pair. Last but not least, of course, we have a hand with a spoon, because everyone does know Whis' appetite. In terms of how well these come off and on the figures, I found that the hand accessories tended to come on and off a lot easier in this case. The head one was, oddly enough, a bit more tricky for some reason or other. I have no idea why. Something about the double-ended ball peg just made it less than cooperative, so this took a few tries, including having to fix it off camera, if I'm being totally honest. In terms of the hands, once again, much like the Beerus figure, pretty much on and off without a hitch. So at least, thankfully, that part, once you get the hitch you kind of want to display with, I'd suggest maybe leave it on there because it is a bit of a pain. Hands, though, you can mess around with to and fro as you want at will, because those will not be too much of an issue, I find. As you can kind of guess from my overall description here, it's not that the Whis is a bad figure by any means, especially with the new colors there. It's a nice solid piece on there, but it's just really a non-figure. There's really not much being offered in him. Accessory-wise, it's very limited. Movement-wise, even more limited, and honestly, you're getting Whis only if you didn't get the original release, or you really just want him to complete your Beerus, because clearly Beerus has some parts that were meant to go with Whis. So let's end this on a little more of a positive note, I find, and that means we're going with Nappa here, which is the 4th and final figure of this original event-exclusive run. Now, as you can kind of see in the packaging here, Nappa's a pretty big boy on that one. Standing at just a little below 7 inches, with no hair extensions, because he has no hair to speak of. He is a very solid figure in multiple definitions of the word, to be honest, on that one. On top of having a very nice heft to him, which will keep him really well based on there, his joint system, although a bit on the older side, does hold up very nice. He's got some very nice tight joints on there, but not overly stiff, I found. Everything moves very nicely as a whole. But the other thing I really liked is just, with the color changes in particular on this one, he actually feels a lot nicer than the original release, which I had, or at least I didn't have briefly myself, but I was able to mess with someone else's copy a little before that. There's a lot more shading going on with the skin. It's a little more noticeable around the muscle folds on that one. Honestly, for the anime colors, they put some really nice yellows in the armor color, which has also a little bit of a gradient to it as well, at least from what I can tell on mine. And everything just holds together really nicely. A bit limited on the leg movement, but around the hip movements, I should say, but it still works. Ankle joints, okay, I'll have to admit, his ankles are nothing to call home about, but they're still quite functional. But probably the biggest change on it is, especially if you look at photos online, unfortunately I don't have anything handy with me to pop in here, is that his facial expressions, his facial decals are much improved over the original release. which were kind of hit or miss a lot. But no, the new facial features, these are Nappa. These are a very good representation of Nappa. This is a very good upgrade on the original figure of Nappa. Taking a look here. Okay, look at his new visor on there. I believe they actually changed the color of the visor on there. Or yeah, no, I think recall it being a different color before. Head connection is a bit interesting on that one, but yeah, those eye decals are a lot more focused and refined than the original one. In terms of the hands, nice sharp detail on there. A little bit of gradient shading on the hands too, not as much as in the rest of the body, but it is present. A little bit of paint, yeah, a little bit of paint outside the lens on that particular hand, but all in all, these are well detailed. I have no real complaints. In terms of switching the head and the hands, the head in this case uses the same kind of double peg joint which was also on Whis, so it is a bit troublesome this change at times. But in terms of the hand ones, those are some pretty big wrist joints on there, and while it requires a little force to get them on there, it's nothing too troublesome, I find. So it's just a matter of just to over push it, I find, and you'll be perfectly alright. The head ones are a bit of a pain though, which is why I kind of, at least in my case, found it where it was easier to try to put on there when the neck joint was tilted slightly forward, otherwise it's kind of uncooperative. So basically find an expression or a head that you like on there that you're happy to leave a while and leave that on there. Yeah, that's an example of what it looks like when you didn't tilt it on there properly. Now that we have it on there, yeah, everything looks nice and tidy. Now, if you were to rank this between what I consider a good purchase and what is blown cash, Nappa and Goku would be the good purchases because Nappa is just that much better than the original in terms of the whole setup there, and Goku is just a nice upgrade, I feel. And in terms of bad purchases, Beerus is on the fence, but Whis absolutely a bad purchase because you have no reason to get Whis unless you have Beerus. At least Beerus might be able to stand a little bit on his own. While talking about official figures has been an interesting palate cleanser, let's be honest, that's not why you came to my channel, now is it? So yes, next time we are going to be talking about the Demoniac Fit True Believer figure, comparing that to the original premium Bandai release as well at the same time to see how it stacks up. So do keep an eye on that in the future. Oh, and before anyone asks, yes, we have ordered this one too, and yes, I will have a field day with that once it comes in. But for now, catch y'all later.